Hello everyone, and welcome to AWIA Virtual Bootcamp, Part 3, Beyond Addresses Using a GIS-Centric Enterprise Asset Management System webinar. I'm Sean Taylor. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to welcome and encourage you to engage with our experts today by using the Q&A box located in the right corner of your GoToWebinar interface. We will try to answer as many questions as possible during the last 15 to 20 minutes. Please note that all phone lines will be muted during this webinar. After the webinar has concluded, we will provide a brief survey about the webinar. Later, we will send an email with a link to watch the webinar on demand. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers. David Totman, Vice President of Asset Management at Innovyze, and Becky Tamashowski, Executive VP of Vision and Product Engineering at CITYWORKS. David Totman is the Vice President of Asset Management for Innovyze, providing strategic direction for infrastructure systems management across the entire Innovyze product line. He has been in the water industry just under 40 years and has applied geospatial technology to business process optimization, project analytics, and full lifecycle infrastructure management for over 30 years. Prior to Innovyze, he was the Global Water Industry Manager for Esri and served as the Asset Manager for Colorado Springs Utilities, one of the largest municipally owned for-service utilities in the USA. His state government service included water quality and water rights adjudications. He is a member of the American Water Works Association and the American Society of Civil Engineers. As an officer in the American Society of Engineers, he holds the title of past president of the Utility Engineering and Surveying Institute. Our second speaker, Becky Tamashowski, is the Executive Vice President of Vision and Product Engineering at CITYWORKS. With over 20 years of experience in hydraulic modeling, regulatory compliance, and asset management, Becky oversees the future vision and technology for CITYWORKS suite of applications and platform. David, I will hand it off to you now.
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks, Sean. So as you many of you have been attending, our virtual boot camp is a 5-part webinar series, and today we are focused on GIS-Centric Enterprise Asset Management. And our next webinar will be on March 4th, where we'll be talking about asset performance and risk modeling. Kind of wanted to start off this particular webinar with, why a GIS-centric enterprise asset management system, and really it's all about location, location. And as we kind of look at this this photo, courtesy of New York City, many times we talk about locating assets and registering them in various computer systems. And so when you kind of look at our friends in New York City and the congestion of underground infrastructure, if you are going with addresses, well, what is the address of that particular pipe or any of the other pipes in the underground system? So really it comes down to, location is the theme and why you would have a GIS-centric enterprise asset management system. So one thing I would like to do, though, before we kind of turn this over to Becky and talk about enterprise asset management, I wanted to do a quick recap of where we've been, just as we've been doing with each of these webinars, talk a little bit about AWIA and asset management in a general context, touch just a quick minute on ASCE 7 hazard tool, and then again, kind of turn it over to Becky for the EAM discussion, and of course we have our Q&A. So very quickly, would like to start off with many of our webinars there, just to kind of set the tone, to understand the audience that's attending, helps Becky and I understand how to kind of tweak some of the content. Sean, if you could go ahead and launch our first polling question for us.
Thank you, David. And so our question here is, have you already filed your AWIA certification? And if not, what size population does your CWS serve? Our responses are yes, I or we have already submitted our AWIA certification. No, I or we have not filed and we serve greater than 100,000. No, I or we have not filed and we serve between 50,000 and 99,999. No, I or we have not filed and we serve between 3,301 and 49,999. And finally, I or we don't know or not applicable. We'll keep the response open for 30 seconds and then share the results. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, this helps Becky and I understand who's out there in the audience, and if you guys are working on the AWIA certification yet, or if you've already done.
Looks like we got a lot of great responses here. So a majority of you, 52% to be exact, said I or we don't know or not applicable. 19% said no, I or we have not filed, and we serve between 3,301 and 49,999. 17% said no, I or we have not filed, and we serve above 100,000. Another 9% said no, I or we have not filed, and we serve between 50,000 and 99,999. And finally, 2% said yes, I or we have already submitted our AWIA certification.
Okay, thanks, Sean. So it sounds like a handful haven't filed, and so hopefully this information is useful to you. And those that I don't know or are not applicable, I'm assuming it's our many of our consulting friends that are just also trying to learn more about what some of these solutions provide. So okay, let's move on. Okay, so very quickly, kind of a webinar recap. Again, we'll go through this fairly quickly. The reason Esri, CityWorks, and Innovice joined together to kind of present information on AWIA is one that we all work together. We're all integrated systems. We're all COT solutions that are configured and then ready to go. And so one of the important things is because we're all built on the Esri platform, we also point to a singular system of record. And that's what's really important about AWIA is, understanding what assets you have, what are you doing, how are you protecting them, how are they funded, all those things. So having a singular system of record is pretty important into having a very consistent response to all the aspects of AWIA. In previous webinars, we went through lots of different resources. We kind of understand that almost from the consulting world, consultants from A to Z are all helping you respond to AWIA needs. One of my favorite resources out there that are free is this water ISAC, which is a partnership of AWWA and WEF and WRF and NRWA, so all these folks coming together to help provide information. You can always kind of look at the previous recordings on some of those or contact us and we'll give you, all the links to those folks. We talked about the actual certification, that you're not really submitting your actual plans, you're just filing these certificates that say you do have these plans. But one of the things we wanted to make sure that, there was really no and there was no certified software that did it all. It really is, the approach of having these integrated systems. But again, lots of different resources out there from EPA and the AWWA and ASCE and NIST and et cetera. Feel free to contact us if you need any of those resources. We were asking about kind of the size of the utility and if you filed or not, because for the big folks, the big cities there, deadlines coming out very quickly, the end of March. It's right around the corner. For those that are in that 50,000 to 100,000 range, kind of have till the end of the year, and for the smaller systems, have until next summer. But again, all these deadlines are kind of right around the corner, and we're very interested in helping you, file those certifications. So some of the lessons learned, definitely, more and more resources are made available. I'm going to talk about two more that we've kind of really found that we're almost kind of finding all the time. We are trying to present this solution approach again, because of Innovyze and CityWorks built on top of the Esri platform. It's how we all kind of work together in this COTS configuration. It really quickly enables implementation and start configuring these for the AWIA response. We did learn kind of and acknowledge in the last one that we really do assume that there is a cyber protection program in place. One of the aspects of AWIA is having, secure facilities and protection. And so, again, the fact that we're built on Esri, which has many security measures in place, though we kind of highlighted the excellent resource from AWWA.org on their cybersecurity that helps you kind of look at some of the tools that they have to help you understand cybersecurity. The last webinar there, we really talked about the importance of the asset registry, right? We talked about, understanding the physical assets, their physical properties, why addresses, pretty much didn't work. You wanted to, because you'd have multiple assets in the road, just like the picture I showed from New York City earlier. And that really the asset registry feeds many of the business activities within the organization. And we also kind of talked a little bit about part of AWIA's understanding risk, and risk really is a function of location. Just because pipes, the way they behave and respond in the system might be much different in the north part of town than the south part of town because of geography, vegetation, dynamic loading, rivers, all these other things that come into play. And it really is helping to understand. We kind of talked a little bit from the financial perspective, the physical ledger versus the general ledgers, but you all want this the single source of truth. Jason Shannon from Esri talked about kind of these high fidelity asset registries, especially in their next generation utility network, and how a lot of these assets all fit together. And as we get in the water industry, we have complex assets, especially in our PRVs and lift stations and such. You get into what we kind of call vertical assets, but the ability to bring all of these together. And then I touched base a bit on kind of hydraulics 101, it's great to have a GIS representation of your assets, but you also want to make sure they're kind of hydraulically competent. I have to make sure that I have, an 8-inch valve is actually attached to an 8-inch pipe, or if not, I have a reducer fitting and those sorts of things. So kind of that high fidelity GIS to make sure that you have a lot of these hydraulically competent fittings that go hand in hand, because many of these parameters too, some of the attribute properties that you have in your GIS also affect some of the hydraulic modeling with factors that affect water quantity, such as flow and pressure, and even water quality, because as we start to understand the water chemistry within the pipes, and then that just leads us into pressure zone management and actually doing calculations for water loss and all those sorts of things. So again, having kind of this hydraulically competent asset registry. I do want to talk a little bit about kind of a new resource. It's not necessarily new, but it's at least being highlighted a bit more, and talk a little bit about AWIA and asset management, because I find myself, when I have these AWIA conversations, they end up really having a root component of asset management best practice. And so one of the things, if you kind of are walking around the EPA website looking at AWIA components, they mention asset management several times, and you find yourself over here in the asset management section of EPA. And what's been highlighted of recent is this asset management switchboard from the University of New Mexico, and I absolutely love this site from UNM. The asset management switchboard. It's a very intuitive website that gives you information that you can convey to your management as you're trying to explain asset management components. But again, the Southwest Environmental Finance Center at UNM has put together this very excellent, kind of way to communicate asset management. And so if we were to kind of take a look at just these 5 core components, they walk you through all of the elements, if you will, but their 5 core components are very specific and quite germane to the AWIA conversation. And so when we kind of drill in at their website, and they talk about the 5 core components. I mean, we could talk about this, you know, for the next 4 hours if we could. But of course, you know, we have just the hour with you folks, and so, you know, when you look at start off with that asset inventory, and that's really why we started this AWIA webinar series with, you know, the asset registry. You know, it's exactly what assets do you have and where are they, because that does affect, you know, their condition. It's all about location. When you start talking about useful life and how much they're worth, that gets us into many of these other conversations. And that last question, what is their energy use? Many of you may have been, you know, have seen out there on the internet this whole water energy nexus, but that seems to be a conversation at Innovyze that we get into a lot now, is the energy consumptive use of you know, your pumps and treatment processes and those things, and what tools are available to help you kind of, you know, optimize your energy usage. When we get into level of service, you know, that's very much in the realm of enterprise asset management, and Becky can talk to that a bit, and how you measure performance. But again, you know, at Innovyze, level of service, to me, that's pressure and flow, right? Almost the basic principles of hydraulic modeling and capacity management, which is a function of asset management, and quite honestly part of the whole AWIA response. Criticality, definitely, you know, there are critical assets. You know, clearly, even in potable distribution systems, you have transmission lines that move water from one pressure district to another. Those are highly critical to the industry, and can be flagged within the GIS, but then also can help prioritize work orders, you know, within your enterprise asset management system. And when you talk about redundancy, that's, you know, we get into a lot of these loop systems, and making sure you do have redundancy of feeding water to various parts of the system. Life cycle costing gets us into a little more complex arena of financials and long-term funding, and making sure, you know, when should you kind of stop spending OpEx and move to CapEx to do, you know, asset replacements. That's, you know, a bit of a science. We'll talk a little bit about that actually in the next webinar as well. But then ultimately, you know, leads to this long-term funding. You know, do you have sufficient funding to carry you on into the future? And that's one of the basic questions of AWIA, is, you know, you know what assets you have, you know what conditioning are, how long they're going to last, but do you have adequate funding mechanisms? And that's why you're starting to see a lot of these AWIA grants come out, infrastructure grants and different things, and state revolving funds, on how people can access funding to sustain their infrastructure. So again, a wonderful site from the University of New Mexico. You know, if well, actually, as I kind of apologize, all these elements, you know, go almost back to our first webinar with listing the AWIA requirements for the resilience assessment, you know, requirements 1 through 6, and the emergency response plan. So again, all kind of ties in together. But highly encourage you, go look at that switchboard, the Southwest Environmental Finance Center Asset Management Switchboard. Again, kind of a great resource out there. All right, moving along. The ASCE 7 hazard tool. You know, may apologize in advance, being an ASCE officer, a little bit of a shameless plug for the American Society of Civil Engineers. This tool has been out for quite some time. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it. The ASCE 7 hazard tool, it's built on top of the Esri platform. It's a wonderful site, very minimal cost, especially if you're an ASCE member. But it basically brings together some of the major hazards that you would be wanting to kind of consider within AWIA. And I just happen to use that little location icon there. I'm broadcasting live from Monrovia, California. That's where the Innovyze office is here in California. And, you know, it's been a bit windy these past couple of days. You may have seen it on the news or not, but it just happens that we're in a special wind region, and you know, it's picked up here on the ASCE 7 hazard tool. But this also includes floods and tsunamis, earthquakes, things like that. So it's a great tool that would be useful, you know, for determining some of the hazardous components of AWIA. And again, it's built on top of Esri, so it's all built on you using location, and you can interact with this particular tool. So again, just a bit of another tool out there from ASCE to help you guys figure out the hazard component for AWIA, and that's at asce7hazardtool.online. So with that, actually, we'll kind of switch gears here a little bit, and I'll be turning this over to Becky and she'll be talking about the GIS-Centric EAM. And before we jump into that, Sean, we have one more polling question just to kind of set the stage, please.
Yes, thank you, David. So our next polling question is, do you have a CMMS or EAM? Our responses are yes, I or we use CITYWORKS. Yes, I or we use a different CMMS or EAM. No, I or we use a manual method. No, but are interested in discussing more. And last, I or we don't know. We'll keep the responses open for 30 seconds and then share the results. Thank you. So it looks like 32% of you said yes, I or we use CITYWORKS. 23% said I or we don't know. 21% said yes, I or we use a different CMMS or EAM. 14% said no, I or we use a manual method. And last, 10% said no, but are interested in discussing more. Thank you.
Okay, well, yeah, Sean, maybe I will go ahead. I feel like I've known the CityWorks folks for quite some time. They're good friends of mine, and I'll see if I can't do some justice for Becky. Of course, she's a much knows the subject matter very well, obviously working for CityWorks, but I will go on with the show and hopefully she'll be able to join us. So clearly CityWorks, as a enterprise asset management solution. One of the things that we even kind of talked about in our very first webinar was, during the transition there, CityWorks was recently acquired by Trimble, a great relationship. It brings full infrastructure lifecycle management to the table with the new relationship between Trimble and CityWorks. But where Becky wanted to kind of go with some of this was, that the challenges that are being faced, and one of the reasons for some of the AWIA regulations, of course, was just all the different issues out there with climate change, interacting with our changing urbanization, understanding the customer commitments through level of service, all the new regulations coming out, such as AWIA, funding, lack of funding. One might say this was an unfunded mandate. So all those things that are starting to come out that affect you from a perspective of technology and asset management. And one of the interesting things about the CityWorks solution, not only just asset management but also permitting. How do you actually operate within your city and kind of track all of these various elements. And so one of the studies that have actually referenced many times before, this water main break rate study from Utah State University, definitely kind of set the stage also for many of these national statistics and many things that we're looking at with response to aging infrastructure, that pipe breaks are up 27% in the last 6 years. The average age of failing water mains is 50 years old, and that compromises 28% of all the mains that are kind of out there. The different materials that are actually starting to fail, and kind of that concept of 16% of mains are all beyond their useful life, which basically means we installed these mains, utilities from long ago installed these mains, and technically they're they should have been dug up and replaced by now, but just because of some of the funding challenges and quite honestly, just the metrics of running a city, it's very difficult to kind of replace some of these mains. But what that is, causing is, this water loss, right? And so how do we effectively manage a water loss? And we can't always just, cut open the street and replace the main just because of various things with major streets and other infrastructure near critical transportation corridors, highways, railroads, those sorts of things. But open cuts one of the kind of the cheapest, most cost-effective methods, but that's what's given rise to a lot of the trenchless methods like pipe bursting and such. So it's kind of like how do these sort of studies really help us understand metrics and put together these solutions that can help resolve those. Now you definitely have the two requirements of AWIA, but from the risk and resilience assessment requirements, it talks about really understanding your system, right? And this is where CITYWORKS really kind of can come into play, is many of these aspects of requirements 1 through 5, but what's really the loaded bullet there is number 6, operation and maintenance of the system. That O&M aspect, there's a huge component to what it takes, and that's really where CITYWORKS comes into play, is helping you with all of these operations, from understanding your past and what are you doing today and what do you need to do tomorrow. When we kind of take a look at the customer side, so to speak, of looking at these systems, there's really a handful of resources out there that talking about using bringing in this data to understand the operational aspects of your system. And that's what kind of talking about these spatial algorithms. Not only is a geography or location issue when it comes to infrastructure and its performance, but also the customer perspective, and that's why I also talked about the hydraulic modeling, pressure and flow. Those are levels of service commitments to your customer base, and you kind of understand that from customer requests, customer calls, bringing in that information. Customer call data can be a critical component. Even social media becomes one of these elements of whether water tastes bad and those sorts of things. But bringing in and hooking up your customer system definitely gives you additional information to understand the performance of that system. And they kind of highlight here of Philadelphia Water Department, which is a CITYWORKS customer, has brought in their CSR system into better understanding how their infrastructure performs. One of the ways that CITYWORKS definitely does this is they take a look at their water quality complaints, right? And so they have built-in dashboards using many of the Esri tools, such as the operations dashboard, but hooking that up, from their customer call center, right, live, their service requests, and putting this, live data on the map. Where do they have water quality complaints? Now, as an innovize person, I would look at that and say, oh, there must be, stagnant water in the system. These are probably dead end lines that may need flushing because of, disinfection byproducts. And so it's really how all of these systems are tied together. Many times we talk about water quantity only, we forget about water quality. Many of you probably also have, LIMS systems, the laboratory information management systems for your water testing. But again, you can kind of get a good insight just simply from data mining your customer call center as well on taste complaints. One of the things that CITYWORKS definitely kind of brings to the table is what is risk, and many systems out there talk about risk, but it really is one of the ways of a true enterprise asset management is to do decision-based actions, coming from understanding risk. And if you just kind of look at the textbook definition of risk, you take the probability of failure times the consequence of failure, and that gives you a business risk exposure, right? So many aspects of probability of failure is just the likelihood of the asset, failing in a given period, and many of those things, there are various statistical methods can be brought to the table for that, and that really comes down from having water main break data in your EAM is that's truth, that's reality, right? So that's one way to kind of test the statistics. Consequence of failure then is, should that asset fail, what's the impact of that? And that really is where the GIS comes into play, right? Consequence is very much a spatial relationship. Again, a 6-inch steel main in the north part of town that's in a dry, sandy soil, probably going to last virtually forever, and that same 6-inch steel main south side of town, if it were in a wet, clayey area, it's going to have accelerated corrosion and things of that nature. So that affects the probability of failure. But if that water main down in the clay soils is serving one of your major water customers, of course there's high consequence of failure. So probability of failure, consequence of failure equals this business risk exposure, and that's the one thing that we're all trying to do. And what AWIA is asking for is indeed this understanding your risk exposure, if you will, to maintaining your system. And I think, Sean, we have another quick question just to poll the audience on risk. If you could launch that poll, please.
Yes, thank you, David. And again, do you have an automated tool that helps you calculate infrastructure risk? The responses are yes, I or we use Innovyze and or CITYWORKS. No, I or we use a manual method, which includes spreadsheets. No, but are interested in discussing more. And last, I or we don't know. We'll leave the responses open for 30 seconds and then share the results. Thank you. Okay, and it looks like we had some great responses here. So do you have an automated tool that helps you calculate infrastructure risk? 34% of you said no, I or we use a manual method, which includes spreadsheets. 25% said I or we don't know. 22% said yes, I or we use Innovyze and or CITYWORKS. And finally, 19% said no, but are interested in discussing more. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. So it's kind of a bit across the board. I almost dared ask the question, do you even calculate risk, right? Because that's one of the things that it's not a new concept, but it is sometimes new to organizations to thinking about including risk, into their decision making process. So, all right, moving along, Sean. Okay, great. So one of the things, this is kind of a classic, as you prepare these systems and moving into this risk-based decision making, this is kind of an evolution of data, if you will, right? So and processes, right? So many of the organizations might still be in paper, where you are still kind of very classic utility operations, and might be a small operation. I don't have lots of resources, and my staff, know the utility like the back of their hand. So they're still doing things, with paper. But we all kind of, along when we talk about aging infrastructure, we talk about aging workforce, and some of these folks are, kind of moving along, kind of looking at that retirement component, and we have a new workforce coming in. When all this is on paper, it's just very difficult for them to kind of pick that up. You mentioned, when we asked about risk and folks are calculating risk with spreadsheets, I'm a huge fan of Microsoft Excel, and I do lots of things with spreadsheets as well. But many times, as an operational system, it's a bit difficult. They tend to be, kind of isolated, and when you kind of bring in that spatial component, we talked about, which asset in that street, going back to that New York, city photo, which assets which, lots of assets within the same right of way. How do you kind of, while you're making very specific answers, getting specific answers to specific assets. And it's really difficult sometimes with spreadsheets to take a look at that holistic viewpoint, right? What is the overall risk for the entire system? What does that look like? What is the geography of those things? So spreadsheets are good, that step up from paper, but there's of course other systems out there. And so when we start talking about GIS and geodata, I can put data into my GIS. Great repositories, definitely gives me that spatial component. I can start to understand asset hierarchies. I can understand my big pipes like transmission pipes and my small pipes, like the small distribution pipes. Definitely getting more eyes onto the assets helps with the data quality, just because people that have been in the field many times, the classical element GIS will list that as an 8-inch pipe, and someone's like, no, that was a 10-inch pipe, we fixed that 15 years ago. Well, that never got into the system and recorded. And so the GIS is a great visual tool to improve the integrity of the asset registry. But it really isn't until we kind of get into this intelligence, the kind of the most mature stage is I've now integrated that GIS, many of these workflows into my organizational business operations, and it starts to become intelligence, right? I've moved from kind of raw data through analytics to offering intelligence and decision-making capabilities. It lets me start to kind of also move from that concept of prioritization to optimization and understanding, predicting what would be happening, tomorrow if I keep my maintenance activities the same, or if I do some adjustments, what that might look like. But again, it really comes down to one of the tenets of asset management is assets have an intent to serve, and so they serve our customers. And so having that civic engagement piece really is a strong element of these systems, is having that kind of that feedback, because that's where your operational performance metrics are, and having that sort of, say, that civic engagement. So it really comes down to understanding all these different pieces of information, with this complex network of systems. Many of you, while AWIA is focused on water, you're combination utilities. I myself came from Colorado Springs Utilities. We were electric, gas, water, and wastewater, right? So your GIS becomes quite complex, and therefore your enterprise asset management systems also tend to have to be complex and manage all these different assets. And that's why addressing kind of tends to be not the best solution when it comes to managing all these different assets, because you'll even have within the same asset class, like water mains, you may have multiple water mains in the same street, right? So it definitely the GIS piece where you identify specific assets come into play. And so when we start talking about these daily operational workflows, one of the things that CITYWORKS brings to the table is that bringing in all the requests, again, from the citizens, with easy to use applications for them to kind of interact with your organization, to then understanding the maintenance requests that are kind of the daily ongoing activities of your utility. Understanding, we've always had the kind of the reactive maintenance, but now we're getting to the preventative and also moving into the realm of predictive with the Internet of Things, the sensory inputs, and a big element of AWIA, of course, is emergency response. Just it seems like our floods are becoming more frequent, our windstorms are becoming more fierce, even hail. All these things seem to be kind of intensifying, and the 100-year flood is now almost becoming the norm. So all these things feed into kind of a central repository where your supervisor's trying to manage all those elements of work, make sure that I'm assigning them accurately, kind of doing some of that load balancing, make sure I don't overwork various crews. They're the ones that are actually kind of out there in the response, and they're having to kind of log all their activities. because this logging then is really what's happening in the field, and that is your measure of quantity of work that's being done. And many of the things we say, there's kind of with this AWIA response as an unfunded mandate, it's like, well, there's that mantra of, do more with less. Well, I can only go so far with that. And so by logging, all of your resources, that helps you kind of, justify those budgets, right? That says, hey, we're doing everything we can. If you want us to do more, it requires more resources, just because there's only so many things that can physically happen within a utility. It is a very tactile environment, right? These physical pieces of infrastructure are within, buried underground, and there's only so many things you can do about that. But all of that really starts to feed this, why we have these analytics and decision support systems, is there these constant feedback loops, right? And this is where we tend to kind of, we get into these virtual systems, these digital models. Those are fed by reality that are coming out of your work management system, your EAM. And so that's the sort of thing that we take a look at is, all of these models are great, but they require, real-time information, real data to help calibrate them. So one of the things that, when you kind of take a look at all these different workflows that are kind of combined with these complex systems that are out there in the field that are mapped, you need to balance all of that, right? It all comes together of having these workflows that are sitting on top of these physical pieces of infrastructure. They're being affected by their environment. They're being affected by your customers themselves they're using these resources. All of these things need to come together. And so one of the things, what does CITYWORKS do? Kind of taking a look at these 4 areas of solution the solution provides. This don't underestimate, I guess, this public inquiry, right? So that kind of is an extension of your workforce, right? All of your customers out there, their ability to kind of help you identify a water main break, right? By simply calling in, or even in social media, tweets. All these tweets they're geo-referenced, that you have a tree down, or all these different activities for public inquiry. Having a kind of a customer call system that feeds in your customer's response, that's really almost like having your own version of IoT, but it's coming from your customers. One of the things, the second, this investigation inspection, to be able to respond to that incident, to accurately identify the asset, to what a great time to also kind of review the assets, right? That's your field truthing. Again, many of us, converted our GIS from, say, plan drawings, but lots of maintenance activities happened in the past that may not have been captured. And so what a great time to capture some of these while you're actually during the investigation. And some of the inspection then is, what work has been done prior to this. That helps me understand how to, a crew was just out here, 2 years ago and fixed this. So, it really helps the respondent crews to understand what is going on as they respond to this particular event. Once you kind of fix this in the field, you triage this, what action took place, you record the work, but it's also very helpful to understand how much labor did it take, what materials did I use, what equipment did I use. These are all these things are being add up to costs. And so understanding all these different elements of what action was taken, how much it cost, as you get into this, what we would call a root cause analysis, this problem cause remedy, it really helps you understand the resources that it took to respond to that particular event. And then number 4 here, this analyzing and reporting, all of that data, if it just sits in the EAM, that doesn't really affect or alter the way you're going to do business in the future unless you analyze it. And you know, that's one of the tasks both at CITYWORKS and Innovyze, is providing new tools to help you do these analyses much easier, right? Because you know, the moment you fix one water main break, you know, you're off to the next one, right? It just seems like it's never ending. And so, you know, no one seems to have time to do the analysis, but that's why it's our mission to create better tools, easier to use tools, faster tools that make sense of all this information and help you actually prioritize your particular resources. One of the elements of CITYWORKS definitely is kind of in their storeroom. I appreciate this, having come from a utility, a Forest Service utility, especially that had treatment and generation plants. All of those things take, you know, consumables, take materials to run, especially, you know, water treatment, all the different chemicals that are used. It's very important, and AWIA is acknowledging this, is where are these stored, right? So having this storeroom of, you know, understanding where the chemicals are stored, but also, you know, storerooms come into play with what we'd call supply chain, right? Making sure you have inventory on hand, you know, just making sure that you can, you know, order those parts in time. But again, it really comes down to, you know, it's really emergency response. It's hazard safety. Should you have a fire at one of your facilities? What should the firefighters expect? You know, chemical tracking is one of these elements. Even with terrorist attacks, you know, you don't, you know, heaven forbid, you know, someone, you know, steals a bunch of chemicals that they shouldn't have their hands on. So tracking that, that's one of the aspects of CITYWORKS. They have a great storeroom tool that allows you to manage and track all of those things. One
David,
more question.
I'm back in.
Becky, back's in. I hope I've tried to do you justice.
You've done a great job, I would say. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for your patience with the technical issues. David,
Yeah.
you can still continue to run the slides for me though, and I can just speak to them as we go through. Thank you.
Well, yep, and we're right here into one of another polling question, Sean. So if you could launch the one about chemicals.
Yes, thank you, David and Becky. So our next question is, do you have an automated tool that helps you track or manage chemicals? First response is yes, I or we use CITYWORKS. Second is yes, I or we use another tool, which includes spreadsheets. No, I or we use a manual method. No, but interested in learning more about getting one. And finally, I or we don't know. We'll leave the responses open for 30 seconds and then share the results. Thank you. Like we got some more great responses. So 45% of you said I or we don't know. Another 25% said yes, I or we use another tool, which includes spreadsheets. 14% said no, I or we use a manual method. 10% yes, I or we use CITYWORKS. And finally, 7% said no, but interested in learning more about getting one. I will go ahead and hand that off to David and Becky.
So kind of almost a 50-50 of tracking and not tracking or don't know. So, all right, well, Becky, I'll run the slides. So that takes us to a GIS-centric EAM.
Yes, and so with everything that David was speaking to in terms of how CITYWORKS is an enterprise asset management system and the functionality that we're able to provide, all of this is based exactly on the ArcGIS toolset. And having that system of record, as you mentioned earlier, which is also being accessed by Innovyze, a single repository for all the infrastructure information and the data about your assets, all being stored within ArcGIS. And CITYWORKS links directly to it, and it's a one single asset inventory. Next slide, David. And this is what helps us to assist you. We know that all the utilities that we work with and those that we don't, all of you available online today, are all striving to do better, to do more with struggling resources, with more regulations, with all the technology that's out there, and understanding how to incorporate all of this to make better and more efficient solutions for your customers. And everybody's striving, as David said, for better constituent management. Having engagement with those citizens and being able to be responsive to capture their complaints, show responsiveness through the utility in terms of being on site, transparency with the organizational data in terms of the work that's being done and how resources are being allocated. that record keeping and transparency. Many of you are already doing all that work that is required by these regulations, but the burden comes in terms of taking that data for all of your activities and providing it back in a record and a report that's easily shared out with other government agencies, and as well as transparency, again, with your customers. And then being able to take that data and provide it back in a format that allows you to actually start to dive into the analysis and analytics and use that for more efficient and better decision making within your organization. And the way that CITYWORKS does this is, again, as we work with the ArcGIS platform, we're able to leverage all of that technology across the suite within Esri. So CITYWORKS treats Esri apps and Esri technology and data as first-class citizens within our application. So we're able to provide organizations the products that they need to run their business the best way that they can. And so if there's workflows that you currently have that are built around some of this Esri technology, we can incorporate those within your CITYWORKS solution and workflow and expand essentially the tool set that's provided back to you as part of your deployment. And it's not limited to just the technology that you see here. An important component as well is being able to pull in that information from other business systems. So having connected information and connected workflows. And this is extremely relevant as we start to talk about the value of IoT, the Internet of Things. All of that sensor data that you currently have out in your deployed distribution systems, whether it's coming from telemetry, meter data, SCADA data, sensors such as those provided by Telog, it allows you to take that information and pull it in to be more responsive and more reactive for what's taking place in terms of planning out the preventative maintenance within your organization. So it's not just a matter of preventative and reactive, but there's a whole area that starts to get into maybe not necessarily predictive, but allowing you to identify where there are problems that are starting to crop up and being able to do something in place to prevent them from actually blowing into a full-blown emergency. And that IoT technology really allows you to, as I said, become more proactive. You're getting into real-time monitoring of the data. So being able to see locations where you have extreme spikes in pressure data, transient pressure, water hammers, identifying where those are recurring repeatedly, being able to look at the historical trends over time and notice that there's specific activities that are taking place in a single pressure zone, being able to use your network to tie back and identify what the cause of those issues might be. We have clients who are doing this work today and using it to comply with regulatory issues and being able to identify perhaps it's a pressure PRV valve, sometimes it's a pump that's turning on at the plant, and being able to go back and make some alterations to the settings within this hardware allows them to start to modify what they're actually experiencing in terms of the distributed pressure through the system, and allows that to make a significant difference in terms of the main breaks that they're experiencing and the resulting restoration costs and level of service and disruption that's taking place within their customer base. And as well, being able to take this data then in for analytics. And so this is an example of data pulled into ArcGIS Insights from Esri. It's a combination of data from Esri, CITYWORKS, and Trimble Telog sensors, allowing us to go through and view that calculated risk that took place through CITYWORKS in correlation with how that distributes across the spectrum of material types for the distribution system, the aging of that pipe, and so where there is the highest incidence of main breaks and leaks based off the year that the pipe was installed, and then how that affects the density of population within those various service areas. So pulling in this data from a number of sources allows us to get a broader picture and more detail and understanding of what's actually taking place in the distribution system, which allows us to make better decisions to actually go through and plan the work that's going to take place to remedy these issues. So that actually leads me to the next poll.
Great, thank you, Becky. And our next question is IoT part of your AWIA compliance strategy? Our first question is yes, already implemented. Not yet, plan on it. No, but are interested in discussing more. And finally, I or we don't know. I'll leave the responses open for 30 seconds and then we will share the results. Thank you. Looks like we got some more good responses. So again, is IoT part of your AWIA compliance strategy? 56% of you said I or we don't know. 21% said not yet, plan on it. 16% responded with no, but are interested in discussing more. And finally, 7% said yes, already implemented.
Yeah, and Sean, I think if I'll jump in a little bit, I think that's indicative of just how things are changing for all of us that are embracing sensors. you know, even the folks that were saying, no, not yet, but plan on it, right? IoT, sensors, SCADA systems, all are definitely on our radar. And I think the one element of, you know, CITYWORKS and the customer engagement piece is, you know, they're almost our own sensors as well, right? So lots of systems are definitely embracing all of that real-time component. So I think we're kind of a bit coming to the end here. So I know, you know, definitely want to remind folks, you know, part 4 is March 4th, where we'll talk a bit more about asset performance and risk modeling. So stay tuned for part 4 there. But definitely we're going to kind of open this up for questions. We have a little bit of time left that we can kind of talk about this, and don't worry, you know, all the questions that submitted, we'll make sure that we answer them, you know, both from an online perspective, you know, so make sure you bring those questions in, we'll get them answered. But while we have Becky online here and myself, you know, one of the questions, I guess, Becky, that might be talking about this, you know, this is all great, you know, there's all this technology that's going on, but, you know, is this really, you know, useful? I mean, can this really be deployed by the smaller systems? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, everything that we talked about and showed here today scales across the size of the organization. And we even have tools that are specifically focused on assisting those smaller organizations with deployment of asset management. So, for example, we have a hosted solution, CITYWORKS Online, that allows us to take on the management of the applications and the technology for those client bases where they have less resources to actually manage the IT side.
Yeah, well, and then I think that's the thing too. It's you know, even with you know, desktop-based systems, more and more customers that we see are also putting those into cloud services, like, you know, standing up an Amazon image. So they're using virtualization, using the cloud as kind of a hardware as a service. So we definitely see, you know, again, with constrained resources, and computing power needs going up and up and up, you know, it seems that cloud computing is always becoming a bit more of the normal conversation these days. And maybe here's a bit of a you know, a challenge question was, so, you know, when you were able to come on and talk about, you know, the GIS-Centric EAM, you know, question is it really the same GIS, you know, what CITYWORKS uses and what Esri has? Is it, and for that matter, Innovyze, which I can attest to, yes, is it really the same GIS?
Yes, I mean, we're using the same web map, same feature services, same data in real time that's shared across all these applications. And that's one of the things that makes such a big difference is if you think about how the various roles in terms of who's accessing that data at any point during a regular day within the utility. Crews out in the field, people in the back office who are doing hydraulic modeling and doing long-term planning, crew chiefs and managers and supervisors who are planning upcoming work. Having that single set of data across the organization makes such a huge difference in accurately planning and understanding the scenarios that are in front of you.
And I think maybe if we can take one last question. Thank you everyone for holding on, and we'll definitely make sure we answer these questions. Question came in, you know, can this be applied to all types of assets? And very specifically, such as, you know, managing groundwater wells. And I think that's a very applicable question, because AWIA, you know, one of the things they want to make sure is your source water, right? Do you have alternative methods of sourcing out your water? And so I know there are folks that are on groundwater that are looking to surface water, and surface water looking to groundwater. And so could CITYWORKS be applied, and Innovyze for that matter, when I talk about it next month, be applied to groundwater systems?
Yes, definitely. And we have clients that have done that as well. CITYWORKS scales across any of the asset types within the state and local government spectrum. I mean, we have clients using CITYWORKS for everything that you mentioned there, David, in terms of distribution, collection, groundwater, surface water collection, all that's available. It's really just a matter of how that data gets brought into the GIS, and then CITYWORKS is just really functionality that gets layered over that data set. If that, hope that clears it up a little bit, but yeah, I mean, anything that can be tracked in the GIS, CITYWORKS can work in correlation to.
Yeah, well, and I think that'll be an interesting question, and hopefully I can touch base on the next webinar on what we kind of call vertical assets, right? So those assets that have moving parts.
Definitely.
You know, in groundwater wells, definitely, obviously, they have pumps, and so you know what's some of the risk components of understanding vertical assets. So that'll definitely be a topic of the next webinar. So. Sean, I think we're a bit out of time, and again, we'll apologize for some of the technical hurdles here, but we will definitely answer all questions. And if Sean, you could wrap up the housekeeping questions.
All right, great. And I'd like to thank our presenters today, David and Becky. And we would like to thank everyone for attending today's session. If we did not get a chance to answer your question today, we promise to get back to you with an answer. Before you go, we are going to provide you with a brief survey about today's webinar experience in your GoToWebinar interface. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.